Mr. Leslie, it's your turn.
Thank you. Mr. Party, in your opening remarks, you alluded to the fact that good business leaders are already paying attention to what is going on in terms of market dynamics and in terms of risk. Is there any evidence that you've found that pension funds and financial institutions aren't paying attention to that risk or those market dynamics, and that the government should or needs to impose new regulations on them?
None that I'm aware of, no. I mean, the test of risk for a pension fund or a company is whether or not you're succeeding in the marketplace. If you are a pension fund and not paying attention to risk and your investments decline in value, well, then you're not doing very well. And you didn't need government regulations to demonstrate that. I think we're in danger of conflating two different kinds of risk. One is the risk to a company, and that is the risk that the company's in the business to manage. The other risk is the one that you want to impose upon them, which is the risk of global climate change. And I'm not saying that's not a risk. I'm saying you're trying to internalize it onto the companies instead of being governmental about it and establishing your own rules about it instead of trying to make them do it for you.
Do you think it's a risk when you have politicians playing around, meddling with CPP, our major pension funds, which is the biggest safety net in which Canadians rely on across this country? Is that also a risk that we should be considering, the fact that we are intentionally trying to starve out the financing of energy projects that have major implications for our country?
Yes, so you're splitting the loyalties of the pension. You're trying to say, well, you want to provide returns to the people that you're going to support in their old age, but we also want you to pay attention to something else. And that, as often as not, is going to diminish the returns you produce for those first group of people. So the best policy is a straightforward one, which is that the pension should be able to pursue the best returns available, because those companies they're investing in are acting within the law. The government meddling just messes the whole thing up.
And we've heard in previous testimony that these ESG investment strategies have broadly underperformed typical portfolios, more diversified strategies, by more than about 250 basis points per annum over the past 5 years. And if this Liberal NDP coalition decided to impose an ESG mandate on the CPP or any other pension funds in this country, it would cost Canadians potentially tens of billions of dollars in lost income and lost security for their retirement and their futures. In your assessment, is that an accurate portrayal?
I don't have those numbers at my fingertips, but let me say this. The difference that we are talking about. So I am not here to argue against a company deciding to take on certain kinds of priorities, to get certification, to adopt guidelines. I'm not suggesting that at all. As long as they decide to do that in the interest of the company, that's great. What we're talking about is the government imposing mandatory rules. You're not allowing the company to make the judgment about the risk or about the investment or about the productivity or about the profit. You are making those decisions for you. The division is between voluntary and mandatory.
We've heard in previous testimony that rather than divestment, investment is the more prudent approach, particularly given the other nations that will provide these fuel sources, energy sources, if Canada does not. Is it fair to say that this approach is actually the exact opposite? We should be investing in new clean technologies to reduce our emissions of our particular energy sources while simultaneously keeping that investment in Canada?
As I alluded to, the Canadian energy is actually a tremendous source of solutions for reducing global carbon emissions. It's not the main source of the problem. It could be a great source of the solution. But the fact that we are knee-jerk about this, and we think that we shouldn't develop anything in this country. That is not what other countries are doing. Other countries who have natural resources are digging up lots and lots of coal in China and India. I'm sure you've been told this. And they produce, China in particular, China is far and away, the largest carbon producer on the planet. And their obligations under the Paris Agreement are essentially non-existent. If we exported natural gas to China, the bang for the buck would be far greater than any of the provisions that you are contemplating putting in place.
A number of years ago, there was a Supreme Court decision that stated, directors owe a fiduciary duty to the corporation and only to the corporation, end quote. Could a government-imposed ESG mandate on private companies actually conflict with their fiduciary duties?
Absolutely, of course, yes. And what you get is split loyalties, as I alluded to earlier. So the way that investors are protected in our economy is that the directors and officers, as you allude to, owe a fiduciary duty to the corporation. And what the courts have said is that that fiduciary duty means that they must try to maximize the profit of the company for the sake of the shareholders.
Thank you.
And if instead the government mandates a split loyalty and makes those directors and officers serve another master, then the fortunes of those investors will
Mr.
decline.
Van Coverden. 2.5 minutes, Mr. Mazur.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Party, you're a lawyer, correct? You mentioned that public companies already have an obligation to consider and declare risks for investors. Can you explain what you mean by this?
Of course. Sure. So there are some companies that are publicly listed on stock exchanges and people buy shares. And so, for example, if you're a company subject to the Ontario Securities Commission, they have a whole list of requirements that these public companies have to meet in terms of the disclosure, the material risks and change and so on. And if they don't do that, then they'll be in breach of those security rules. More principally, the whole idea of a business enterprise is to be responsible to the people that you that invest in you, and so that's the definition of an entrepreneur: someone who takes risk and manages it.
Thank you, Mr. Rutledge. How many megatons of emissions will be reduced in Canada by implementing OSFI's climate-related financial disclosure expectations?
When financial institutions begin to measure their counterparties for emissions, they will make pragmatic, empirically driven decisions on whether to continue to expose themselves to those institutions over time. And to the extent that institution decides to lower their exposure to emitters of greenhouse gases, then they'll pull capital. It is not our job nor our intent to measure the reduction of emissions in the broader economy by forcing disclosure. It is our job and intent to measure the risks financial institutions expose themselves so their boards and senior managers can make sound, risk-based judgments.
So you're not worried about reducing emissions? It's not one of the wanted outcomes, but okay. Mr. Rutledge, how much does it cost financial institutions to meet OSFI's climate-related financial disclosure expectations?
A very, very quick answer, please. If you have the figure. If you don't, you can send it to us.
Yeah. There was a study done for a smaller, medium-sized bank where the burden would be highest. To meet our disclosure, or rather measurement rules or requirements, it would be about $50,000 to $100,000.
Can you please table that?
Yeah, could you send us something in writing on that, Mr. Rutledge?
Thank you.
There's also a study by the IMF on
we got to keep going,
compliance costs
Mr.
Sorry,
Yes, both studies, please.
We'll table
Thank you.
Madam